when you learned Spanish, did you learn about the tenses?
Well, I did, but not immediately. I started learning really late. I think in the previous podcast, I mentioned I was 27 when I started learning, and my English grammar was good because I had a very good implicit understanding of English grammar. If I were to write an essay, for example, the essay would be written well. And nonetheless, the knowledge that I had of English, it was just the typical implicit knowledge that every native speaker has. If you said something incorrectly, I would correct you and say, no, you have to say it this way, for example. Just like in Spanish, everybody corrects if you say something incorrect. But I didn't have any explicit knowledge. At one point, you know, third, fourth, fifth grade, you know, all the students study English grammar, but it makes so little sense to anybody in the third, fourth, or fifth grade, especially when you're studying of your own language that you already speak. There's nothing in it that reveals itself to you that's important for any reason. Then, you know, I remember making sentence diagrams in the fifth grade. It was just torture, having to put preposition or conjunction or who cares. So as an adult, I was probably about 6 months into Spanish, just like with basically an English-Spanish dictionary, trying to put sentences together based on, you know, words that you pull out of the dictionary, you know, and just like put a sentence together really stupidly. And it didn't occur to me that verbs conjugated, not in any explicit sense, it didn't. It didn't, you know, when I wanted to look up, what did you eat yesterday? Try to make up sentences for people at work or whatever, you know, they're Mexican and they don't speak English. You try to talk to them. And you say, well, what did you eat yesterday? And your sentence that you would put together is, ¿Tú qué hacer comer ayer? You know, it comes out like that. Why I wasn't making the connection that I'm just seeing the words and trying to put them together. I called a number in a newspaper for somebody who was giving Spanish classes, and I went with this woman who was giving classes for, I don't know, maybe 3 months, 1 hour a week. Our first session that we had together, she explained to me, she goes, I'm impressed by your willingness to try to say things in Spanish, but you have no concept of conjugations or anything.
Yeah.
Go out and get the book, the 501 verbs. I said, okay, you know, so I left there and I got the book. It's just like this little like Bible looking thing. And
Yep.
it's just pages and pages and pages of conjugation tables. And when you open it, there's nothing in there that indicates to you what any of it means because it's all Spanish. There's nothing that tells you, for example, in your own language, what this refers to or that refers to. You might see things like futuro, and you say, okay, well, I imagine that's future, you know, or presente, you say, okay, I imagine that's present. But when you see something like pretérito, you can't make any visible connection right at the beginning, you know, that has anything to do with.
And what about pasado pluscuamperfecto?
Yeah, that's a favorite.
Yeah.
Where does words like that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll see those things, and it was kind of overwhelming. But I started noticing because you sit down, you have breakfast or lunch. So, you know, you get out the book, you just flip through it and flip through it and flip through it. And you started to notice that all the conjugation tables had similarities. Everything kind of followed a pattern. You know what the pattern means, but you can see that there's a pattern there. And you start to see, I was just overwhelmed by it. How many different ways can you make a verb? It's one word. How many different ways can you say this word? But as I started to notice the patterns, then that kind of helps take some of the mystery out of it. It's like when you see all the stars in the sky and they just look randomly up there. But when somebody points you out different constellations and whatnot, you start to recognize that it's not as random. It is, but you make sense out of the randomness because you can see the patterns and things.
Yeah.
Once I started, you know, I went back to the teacher and I asked her and I said, look, I said, I'm seeing these patterns here. I said, can you tell me, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 of these. Can you just write the English equivalent next to this and the English equivalent next to this and this and this? I said, with that, I'll come back next week with more. But once I started seeing the patterns like that, and I started to understand what they referred to in terms of what, not necessarily in what English does, but just in what they're communicating. If I say trabajo, I can see the end of that and know that refers to me. If I say trabajamos, I can see the end of that, the amos, and I know that refers to us.
Yep.
So you start to see those and you make those connections and suddenly things start to make more sense. But yeah, I had to, fortunately, I met somebody who told me, you need to look at this stuff. And when I looked at it long enough to start to see some patterns. And then I was interested in figuring it out.
All right.
From there on, the puzzle started coming together a lot faster.
All right. Look, well, in that way, well, you saw the patterns in the language, and in my case, something similar. I mean, I just noticed that some English tenses had an equivalent in Spanish. I noticed that, I remember that, and in that way, for me, it was easy to learn and to remember, to memorize those things. I mean, for example, let's talk about conditionals as well. Some people, conditionals are quite difficult, but for me, it's like, oh, come on, it's in Spanish, we do basically the same. I mean, I know certain things are different, but we do the same. And we have these three conditionals, well, in English, four. But anyway, and it follows more or less the same pattern, like, sí, yo quiero esto, coma, even with that punctuation, voy a hacer esto. And we can change it. So that's what I mean with what I noticed when I was learning, and I was like, okay, it's like Spanish, a little bit like Spanish. What else? Well, some other tenses, not with words, because sometimes not with words, but in tenses and in certain sentences, or the structure of certain sentences, I noticed that, and that helped me remember how to use English.